You walk into a room with one person from every generation. Just watch what happens. The boomer tells you what they think, then tells you again, with more context. The millennial tells you how they feel, and genuinely wants to know how you feel about how they feel. The Gen Z already posted about it, already filming the follow-up, already reading the comments section. And the Gen Zer, they're on their second coffee. They've already clocked how to beat traffic home. And they're sitting there thinking, wait, was there an email about this? Because there really could have been an email. Here's the thing about Gen X. They look completely fine, calm, unbothered, like nothing's even happening. But they're carrying way more than you'd ever guess. They just decided pretty early on that if something needed handling, they were probably the one who was going to handle it. So they got quiet, they got capable, and they got really, really good at making it all look easy, like a duck on a pond, smooth on top, paddling like crazy underneath. This is the psychology of Generation X. I'm fine. 2 words. The most loaded phrase in any Gen Zer's vocabulary. I'm fine can mean tired, can mean overwhelmed. It can mean, my mom's called 3 times, my back is doing a whole thing. I forgot to take something out of the freezer. And Karen from accounting just replied all to the entire company and used the phrase per my last email. Here's the deal. Gen Zers grew up in homes where showing too much need felt risky. Words cost something. Asking for help usually meant way more explaining than it was ever worth. And let's be real, explaining yourself to a parent in 1987 mostly just meant you ended up doing the dishes while they kept talking anyway. So you learned to handle it. You got really good at I'm fine. And honestly, I'm fine has layers, like a whole system. There's I'm fine, which means managing, but barely. There's no I'm fine, which means do not even go there. I've got it. There's I'm good, thanks, which is code for this conversation is over. And then there's just the nod, just a nod, which means they've already processed it, handled it, and moved on while you were still figuring out how to bring it up. It's honestly kind of efficient. You gotta respect it, even if it's a little terrifying. So who exactly is Gen X? Born between 1965 and 1980, right in that gap between the boomers, who had strong opinions about absolutely everything, and the millennials, who showed up ready to be photographed from day one. Gen X grew up at a genuinely weird moment in history. The traditional family setup was cracking. The internet hadn't arrived to explain anything yet. There was no podcast, no Reddit, no one to ask, hey, is this normal? You just figured it out. Or you asked an older cousin who also had absolutely zero idea. They watched Watergate unfold on TV. They watched companies promise lifetime jobs and then hand out pink slips during the same decade. They grew up with Cold War anxiety on the nightly news and duck and cover drills at school, as if getting under a wooden desk was going to save anyone from anything. They learned pretty early that what's advertised and what's actually delivered are 2 very different things. They're the last generation that remembers life before everything became content, before every moment needed to be filmed, before every thought needed a caption. A huge chunk of Gen Zers were latchkey kids. And if you didn't grow up that way, let me paint you the picture. It's 1982. You're 9 years old. You've got a key on a string around your neck, a backpack with a busted zipper, and about 2.5 hours before any adult on Earth will know where you are. Your location tracker is the clock on the kitchen wall. Your check-in system is a sticky note that says, back by 6. Your emergency contact is the neighbor across the street. Nobody officially gave her the job, she just kind of came with the neighborhood. Always home. Always smelled a little like cigarettes and Lipton iced tea. She was the whole plan. Texting? Come on. There was one phone. In the kitchen. Attached to the wall with a curly cord that, if you really committed to it, could just barely stretch to the bathroom for something close to a private conversation. Calling your friend meant their mom answered. Or their dad. Or a sibling who definitely stayed on the line the whole time. The latchkey afternoon was simple. Key, backpack, 2 hours of cartoons, and a peanut butter sandwich put together by a 9-year-old under conditions that would absolutely trigger a food safety inspection today. Here's the thing nobody really talks about. Coming home to an empty house when you're a kid teaches you stuff. Real stuff. Fast. You learn to listen for cars in the driveway. You learn to feed yourself, and at 9, feeding yourself means working with whatever's in the fridge, including stuff your mom said was still good, which is a judgment call you'll be confidently making with your own leftovers for the next 40 years. You learn that panicking doesn't actually help. If the smoke alarm goes off and it's just you figure it out. You wave a dish towel at it. You call it handled. You learn that waiting for someone to save you takes longer than just solving the problem yourself. That's where the Gen X comfort with silence comes from. Millennials fill quiet with a podcast. Gen Z fills it with their phone. Gen X just sits in it. An empty room is just a room. Nothing wrong with a room. And that's where the self-reliance came from too. Not from confidence, from repetition. A whole lot of it. Alone. With appliances. By the time most Gen Zers were 11, they could run a microwave, program a VCR, work a Walkman with a dying battery, and in certain households, operate a label maker like they were built for it. All without reading the instructions. Because reading the instructions was basically admitting you couldn't figure it out on your own. They became the adults who, when you hand them something broken, say, "Give me a sec," and then just disappear. 45 minutes later, they come back having fixed that, plus 2 other things nobody even mentioned, including one thing everyone had quietly started calling a quirk. Their love language is, "I figured it out." Second love language, "I already took care of it." Third love language, and this one's real, is showing you the correct way to load a dishwasher. Once, in total silence, and then never bringing it up again because as far as they're concerned, the lesson has been delivered. Now here's where it gets interesting, because being that self-reliant has a catch. When you've spent your whole life handling everything yourself, you start to feel like needing other people is actually the dangerous part. Like that's where things go sideways. So Gen X built themselves some emotional armor. And it looks like this. They don't say, "I'm worried about you." They ask if you've eaten. They don't make a big speech. They just fix the wobbly hinge on your bathroom door and never mention it. They show up with soup and say, "I was already making some," which is almost definitely not true. But they say it so casually that questioning it feels rude, so you just take the soup. They'll text LOL when their whole week has been a complete disaster. They'll show up for your crisis, crack 2 jokes at the door, and quietly handle 3 things while you're still processing that they even arrived. They care. Like genuinely, deeply. They just deliver it the way a warehouse ships a package. No branding, no fanfare. Shows up when you need it, job done. Around back. Sign here. And this is exactly why, when a Gen Zer hears a big new plan at work, they respond with one word. Sure. Just sure. It drives younger coworkers crazy. It looks like pure indifference. But it's not, it's pattern recognition running at full speed. They've seen this rollout before, in multiple companies, with different fonts on the slides. Synergy became ecosystem somewhere around 2018, but the bones? Identical. That one sure actually translates to, "I've already got 3 backup plans ready for when this falls apart. I know exactly which week it's gonna happen, and I've got a frozen pizza set aside for that Thursday." Because that's the day this whole thing becomes a document called Lessons Learned that we will definitely use next time. It's not cynicism. It's experience. Big difference. And get this, these are also the people who invented the meme before the meme even had a name. They were faxing Far Side cartoons around the office in 1991. They survived Y2K, the dot-com bust, the 2008 crash, and at least 4 separate, "This is fundamentally how we work now" announcements. Their nonsense detector isn't broken. It's extremely well-tuned, and it runs quietly in the background of every meeting, every all hands, and every company-wide email that kicks off with exciting news. Gen X and marketing have always had a complicated relationship. They grew up in the mall era. Food courts, Sam Goody, Orange Julius, that whole thing where every single mall in America smelled exactly the same, Cinnabon, soft pretzels, and just a hint of candle store. They were the target market. Companies made them a lot of big promises. And then some of those companies folded. The executives walked away with golden parachutes while the middle managers were literally packing up their desk plants. Gen X watched that happen. Took notes. Didn't forget. So now, you can have a great brand, 7 hashtags, a sunrise pic, and the word authentic somewhere in your bio. And a Gen Zer will smile, nod slowly, and wait to see what actually shows up. They're not being difficult. They're just waiting on the receipt. And when what's delivered actually matches what was promised, they become some of the most loyal people you'll ever have in your corner. But you gotta earn it. The pitch doesn't count for anything. And that same energy, that's how they love people. Gen X love is practical. Not grand gestures. Not posts. It's just showing up and doing the thing that needed doing quietly without making it a whole production. They'll pick you up from the airport at 4 a.m. Zero complaining. Help you move a couch without a planning session. Mow your lawn while you're out of town and genuinely never bring it up. Stay late to fix a problem that wasn't even theirs and then slip out before anyone can thank them. Their version of "I love you" is noticing your gas tank was almost empty and filling it up. Their version of an apology is showing up the next day with exactly the part you needed. Their version of a love letter is returning something you borrowed, wound correctly, labeled, back in the right spot. Not flashy, but solid. It lasts. It's basically romance with a lifetime warranty and free installation. No signature required. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough when it comes to Gen X. They're the only generation that fully remembers both worlds, and actually lived through the transition in real time with zero hand-holding. They used paper maps, like genuinely navigated with them, tried to fold them back up, failed every single time, just shoved them under the seat. They had phone books the size of a medium dog. They'd wait for exactly the right song to come on the radio so they could smash record on a cassette tape at just the right second. Finger hovering, barely breathing. They had video stores, late fees, a VCR clock that blinked 12 o'clock basically the entire 1990s because the manual disappeared and the remote was somewhere deep in the couch cushions. Then the internet showed up, and they just adapted, learned it as adults, watched dial-up screech to life every single morning like it was having some kind of breakdown, had a Hotmail address, survived AOL chat rooms, ordered from Amazon when it literally sold only books, and 2-week shipping felt totally normal because, hey, everything took 2 weeks. Now they explain technology to their parents and explain to their kids that a typewriter is a real object, not just an aesthetic prop. Nobody handed them the bridge roll. They just became it, because somebody had to. Growing up before the internet also meant growing up with a whole different relationship to privacy. Back then, if you did something embarrassing, maybe 10 people knew. 15 if it was a truly rough week. Your 8th grade haircut? 1 photo, 1 album, 1 house. Don't like it? Just make sure that album never comes out at Christmas. You could end a relationship, move across town, and genuinely start over. The past just stayed there. It didn't have a profile. It didn't pop up as a suggested connection on LinkedIn 3 years later. They made mixtapes too. Real ones, hand-labeled, hand-assembled, took an entire Saturday. That tape was basically a personality test you were personally delivering to one specific person. It meant something, and if things went south, that tape either got returned super awkwardly across a parking lot, or it got taped over. No backup, no cloud sync, just gone, which honestly was fine. So yeah, putting your whole life online feels a little exposed to a lot of Gen Zers. They grew up knowing the difference between what's yours and what's public. And they've held that line pretty carefully ever since. Real quick, here's your generational family portrait. Same afternoon, booking a doctor's appointment for a parent and editing a college essay for their kid. Helping mom figure out how WhatsApp voice messages work, and helping dad understand why that Facebook investment group is not a real financial institution. Paying off a student loan and a hearing aid at the exact same time, both on autopay, because if it's not on autopay, it's not happening. There's just too much going on. The kid who learned to never ask for anything became the adult that everyone comes to for everything. Their inbox is an ongoing situation. Their family group chat is 16 unread messages, a couple of voice notes nobody's listened to yet, and a meme from a contact saved as Dad's cell that came in Tuesday with absolutely zero context. And because they handle all of it so competently, people forget that capable and unlimited are not the same thing. They managed whole years that would have broken most systems, while making a casserole, returning their mom's call, and fixing the thing in the garage that everyone else had already written off. So if you're Gen X, here's the part that doesn't usually get said. You can be strong and also take a break from being strong. Being capable doesn't mean you've got to do it all alone. Forever. You can be independent and still let someone else bring the snacks sometimes. You can handle everything and still hand one thing off. That doesn't bring your average down. That's just being a human. The reliable one deserves to be checked on too. The person who always shows up deserves someone who notices when they got there. The one who fixes everyone else's stuff deserves to come home and find dinner already on the stove. You've spent a long time getting really good at needing very little. It's okay, genuinely okay, to start practicing the other direction. Slowly, on your own terms. with the same dry humor you've brought to literally everything else. And yeah, you've probably been watching this whole thing with your arms crossed. Maybe a little smirk. Maybe your eyes got slightly atmospheric somewhere around the 13-minute mark. That's fine. You're fine. We know. Because here's the truth. Strong and fine aren't the same thing. Low maintenance and okay aren't the same thing. Capable and unlimited aren't the same thing. The people who need the least aren't always doing the best. They're often just the most practiced at needing less. Gen Zers got fluent in "I'm fine" the same way you get good at anything, by doing it a lot, mostly alone, in situations where they didn't really have another option. And that skill served them. It still does. But it was never the whole story. Go check on a Gen Zer today. They'll roll their eyes. They'll say they're fine. They'll mean it and they'll appreciate it, and they will absolutely not tell you that. But they'll remember.